We're very pleased that Mrs. Ablonczy is joining us today to share the perspective she has gained from her many years of public service and political experience. And please join me in welcoming her to the podium.
Well, thank you, Ron. I'd like to begin by thanking King's University College and the Institute for Christian Studies for co-hosting this conference, as well as Dr. Kuipers, you for your kind invitation to join everyone here today. Today's discussion on economic justice and the common good reflects very current concerns and will undoubtedly help inform important future actions. It is appropriate that the Micah Center is a sponsor of this event. Who's here from the Micah Center?
He's in Honduras.
Yeah, Roy's in Honduras. So.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say nice things about them anyway. The Center's inspiring message is to be an agent of hope for and with the poor. That demonstrates wonderful obedience to the greatest commandment, to love our neighbor as ourselves. I'm excited that the Micah Center's water project team left for Honduras last week on my birthday. The vision God gave to his prophet Micah, the one that energizes the work of your Micah Center, is as fresh and relevant in the 21st century as it was in 700 BC. I love Eugene Peterson's translation. He's already made it plain how to live, what to do, what God is looking for in men and women. It's quite simple. Do what is fair and just to your neighbor. Be compassionate and loyal in your love. And don't take yourself too seriously. Take God seriously. We read in Proverbs 29, where there is no vision, no prophetic vision, the people cast off restraint. Outside of God's vision for our lives and actions, humility, compassion, and justice very often go out the window. But passionate commitment to his vision gives us the moral incentive to obey with honesty and integrity. I'm happy that the Micah Center has chosen to model that path. The name of this conference suggests, when it comes to economic justice, that we are not there yet. Otherwise, why would we have in the conference? I agree. Today's dialogue on how to reach the goal has already been very, very rich. I hope to add some perspective that will stimulate the discussion further. 2 years ago, I attended the 2012 Summit of the Americas in beautiful Cartagena, Colombia. Canada's Prime Minister, leading a developed country, and Peru's President, leading a developing country, both addressed the summit's business forum. Prime Minister Harper chose to expand on the proposition that resource development has vast power to change the way a nation lives, and talk about how to maximize the value of this great industry for a country and its people. President Hamala emphasized the strides that have been made throughout the hemisphere toward peace, democracy, and the rule of law. He also spoke about openness to the world being the best way to attain economic and social justice. The President stated, "Today, through trade, our hemisphere has achieved sustained economic growth to drive development and social inclusion." But he warned about the impact of the global drug trade and how its ties to terrorism, organized crime, and corruption undermine our institutional structures and does not allow our people to fully enjoy the benefits of economic growth. What struck me is that our Prime Minister was able to take for granted the conditions that underpin economic development and opportunity. But President Hamala emphasized his view that these are still very much a work in progress. In light of differing perspectives, the question becomes, how can we best work together toward the ideal of economic justice and the common good? But first, let's talk about defining terms. Imagine blind people examining an elephant and each describing it very differently. I once represented Canada at a conference in Chile on how to strengthen the Inter-American Democratic Charter. To my surprise, I heard more definitions of democracy than I ever imagined existed. I thought it was a given that democracy meant rule by the people. But to others at the table, democracy meant social inclusion, or food security, or resource sharing, or shaking off the oppressive hand of exploitation. And on it went. Agreeing on the definition of economic justice can prove to be just as tough. BusinessDictionary.com defines it as, quote, the basic and well-accepted principle of fairness, where the consequence of official policies should be the equal allocation of benefits among participants in an economy. The site then talks about policies to eliminate discriminatory hiring practices and permit people to work freely. The Inter-Pares Social Justice Organization expresses concern that as national economies become more integrated into the international economic system, wealth is being concentrated in fewer hands. The organization says that we need the inclusion and participation, especially of the most vulnerable. So we see a close relationship between economic justice and social justice. The Catechism of the Catholic Church states, society ensures social justice when it provides the conditions that endow associations or individuals to obtain what is their due according to their nature and vocation. And the Oxford Dictionary defines social justice as justice in terms of the distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society. Does any of that make it clear to you what economic justice really means? I have to say, all it leaves me with is a growing understanding that this is a very complex concept. Today's conference will no doubt confirm, and tomorrow too, that economic justice can and will be approached from differing perspectives. But the kicker is, how do we define it in measurable, practical terms? If we try to measure economic justice, we have to take a lifetime approach. For example, students have much lower incomes. Seniors generally have lower expenses. While some individuals may be chronically unemployed, many or underemployed are simply in transition. It is important to look at all underlying factors. Economic justice also presents a generational problem. We have to think about protecting the interests of both the current and future generations. We can't deliver economic justice to one without impacting the other. That is why we pay close attention to sustainability for the environment. Alberta has a heritage fund, an acknowledgement that non-renewable resource wealth also belongs to future generations. It is a reason to pay attention to public debt, which will inevitably burden our children and grandchildren. We agree that justice is a fundamental value in all civilized societies because its absence creates profound harm. We can discuss actions that each of us as caring individuals ought to take in order to move the scales of economic and social justice into greater balance. But as we strive toward economic justice on a variety of levels, we soon come to see that many streams must flow from that watershed before we can ever hope to set sail in fair winds upon an ocean of plenty for all. For purposes of this discussion, I'm going to stick my neck out and define economic justice as equality of opportunity, the freedom to pursue a better standard of living and quality of life through hard work and initiative with reasonable access to necessary resources. If we approach economic justice in terms of equality of opportunity, we will have programs such as publicly funded education and health care. And of course, those with significant disabilities would be provided with special support because they do not have the same opportunities. On the other hand, we hear growing calls for greater equality of result. This would expand the redistribution of income. But we know that reward is an incredible and necessary motivator of human behavior. The incentive to achieve, to strive, and to accomplish is vital to human progress. Some redistribution is necessary to equalize opportunity. But if the equation strays too far in that direction, incentive dies. Isn't the real question, how would you know if you have received economic justice? An abstract concept will never do. It must have meaning at the individual and local level. Now, because I'm a politician, I want to talk a little bit about the politics of economic justice. If we want economic justice across our own society and the globe, we'll have to balance competing interests and design workable compromises. This calls for the practice of politics in the best sense of the word. Elected politicians do have a central role to play in determining and delivering economic justice. In our country, we are fortunate that all citizens, regardless of wealth and influence, decide who will represent their interests in the formulation of public policy. But it's still not an easy task. There's a lot of disagreement around fairness and entitlement. For example, in the U.S., we're seeing an unusual political polarization. Democrats generally deeply believe in the role of government, the sanctity of social programs, and they're trending toward greater redistribution. Republicans generally believe that governments do not create wealth and jobs, that business, investors, innovators, and entrepreneurs are our country's wealth and job creators, and that taxing this activity more results in less of it. All of this is further complicated by the reality that vested interests, political supporters with deep pockets, and too big to fail sectors too often skew government policy. In fact, a 2012 analysis by The Economist suggests that social spending is often less about helping the poor than giving goodies to the relatively wealthy. A case in point emerged around the unveiling by U.S. President Obama earlier this year of 5 promise zones. These are hard-hit communities that will be the focus of poverty fighting and job creation efforts. The initiative will make it easier for local businesses to get federal grants and loans. But it turns out that only previously funded organizations were eligible to seek Promise Zone aid. In Los Angeles, there was only one such group, a nonprofit led by a major campaign fundraiser for the president and frequent White House visitor. As a result, the 2 poorer neighborhoods with 21 and 39% higher poverty were left out of the anti-poverty zone altogether. As the debate rages and accusations fly, the U.S. is drifting with a very disturbing lack of governance. Michael Spence, professor of economics at NYU's Stern School of Business and a strong critic of income inequality, observed with sadness, "One can hope that pragmatism and compromise will prevail over the moral righteousness of political extremes. No one likes living with second or third best alternatives, but that is America's reality for now," he says. In Canada, too, of course, there are differing views. While Canadians are generally in agreement about wanting low taxes and restrained government spending, there are always calls for greater income redistribution. This runs up against those who think experience has shown that policies designed to deliver equality of results have succeeded only in harming economies and stifling opportunity. A troubling case in point is one of our own provinces. Quebec has the largest social spending in the country, but its debt as a percentage of the economy sits at a very scary 50%. As one analyst noted, their economy is barely growing, employment growth is weak, productivity is in the pits, and young people are leaving in droves for greater opportunity elsewhere. In February, former separatist Premier Jacques Parizeau published an opinion piece in Les Journaux de Montréal, headlined, "Quebec Living Beyond Its Means." His conclusion, "It is the first time in 30 years that I'm worried about the economic future of Quebec." At what point does expanding entitlements and social benefits harm more than it helps? In Spain, powerful unions have won concessions that make it virtually impossible to fire a worker after 3 years on the job. The result should have been predictable. Employers do not retain workers past that date. Youth unemployment, a shocking 53%. Young Spanish workers have a seriously limited opportunity to establish themselves in a career. So there's an increasingly pitched battle between those who support the social welfare state and those who believe jobs and economic opportunities are created by lessening rather than increasing the tax burden on the private sector. But the reality is, and this is important, there has to be a balance between the two. Both the private and public sectors play important and complementary roles. The private sector is responsible for paying taxes, fair labor practices, protecting the environment to ensure economic sustainability. The public sector also has a duty to act without corruption, to ensure a fair and clear enabling framework, and the responsible use of public money. Government also wields important tools to prevent people from being robbed of opportunity. For example, legal rules to ensure marketplace fairness, such as regulations against insider trading. While moving toward economic justice is very important, finding a middle ground to work from is absolutely critical. And we must always remember, in the heat of theoretical and philosophical discussions, that there are real people, in some cases entire nations, whose lives and well-being hang in the balance as we seek the most effective path forward toward economic justice. It's my view that government has a legitimate role to play in promoting equality of opportunity. But I think it should be careful not to go down the road to equality of results. Losing the balance means fewer opportunities, fewer incentives for the next generation to be the best it can be. I think so far Canada has been pretty successful in getting this right. We attract the best and brightest to our shores. Immigration is one of the greatest strengths of the Canadian economy. The whole world recognizes that there are real opportunities here. Now, I want to turn to economic justice on the global level. The Government of Canada is strongly committed to international efforts to help lift our global neighbors out of poverty. There are some who like to argue whether this can best be achieved by promoting the operations of, quote, free markets, versus first bringing about greater social justice. In reality, both are necessary. In 2006, the Government of Canada began to analyze the results of our country's development assistance. Up until that time, it had been used largely with one-off objectives, such as securing large contracts for Canadian companies or leveraging votes in support of our positions in multilateral fora. There was no coherent long-term development vision. Nor did our foreign aid appear to be leaving people at the local level any better off. In fact, quite the reverse. This realization was startling and deeply concerning. I recently talked to a Canadian ambassador who has served in several developing countries. He also spent many years at CEDA. He certainly didn't mince words when I asked him about this. Quote, "Foreign aid has over the past several decades created a dehumanizing donor-recipient relationship, a culture where you don't have to work, just wait for the largesse to roll in. It's also paternalistic," he told me. That's the view of Robert D. Lupton in his excellent book, Toxic Charity, written in 2011. Some of you probably read this. Have any of you read that book, Toxic Charity? Yeah? If you haven't, I highly recommend it. And if you don't believe me, you can talk to this gentleman here. He'll give you the straight goods. Stepper Homes in Calgary sends teams to build houses for the poor in El Salvador. Toxic Charity is required reading before they set out. Lupton has spent over 4 decades working for urban renewal in inner-city Atlanta. I wish I had time to talk in detail about the insights he's gained because they really illuminate this whole area of economic justice. But he titles his book Toxic Charity because he has seen firsthand how an outpouring of generosity toward the most vulnerable hurts more than it helps. How could this be? By creating dependency, destroying personal initiative. Lupton is adamant. When we do for those in need what they have the capacity to do for themselves, we disempower them. He points to a well-known study out of the World Bank. Quote, "Africa can serve as a large-scale example of the problem. In the last 50 years, the continent has received $1 trillion in benevolent aid. Yet country by country, Africans are far worse off today than they were half a century ago. Overall per capita income is lower today than in the 1970s. Over half of Africa's 700 million lives on less than $1 a day. Life expectancy has stagnated, and adult literacy has plummeted below pre-1980 levels. It's a kind of curse," says Dambisa Moyo, African economist and author of the book Dead Aid. By the way, I'm happy to say these horrifying numbers have improved a little bit over the last couple of years. But they illustrate why Canada has taken a new approach. And thankfully, that does seem to be gaining some results. Lupton certainly does not see his own country immune from these problems. He goes on to observe, "A similar devastation has been inflicted upon the subsidized poor of our own country, though not as extreme. For all our efforts to eliminate poverty, our entitlements, our programs, our charities, We have succeeded, he says, only in creating a permanent underclass, dismantling their family structures and eroding their ethic of work. And our poor continue to become poorer. Lupton also identifies approaches that have been successful. He points to the Millennium Challenge Corporation in the U.S. This is an important partner of Canada. He believes that smart investments call for partnerships with countries willing to help themselves, willing to assume accountability for results, and willing to stand up to corruption. Willingness to stand up to corruption is another enormously important aspect of economic justice. You will recall President Hamala also highlighted this issue. That's echoed in a new book by Gary A. Haugen. He's the founder and president of International Justice Mission. Here's the title, The Locust Effect, Why the End of Poverty Requires the End of Violence. Have any of you read that book? It's quite new. Haugen makes a very compelling case. Yes, there's been progress in the fight against global poverty, but he warns there's a hidden crisis, silently undermining our best efforts to help the poor. It is violence. Rape, forced labor, illegal detention, land theft, police abuse, and other brutalities. These appalling conditions have become routine and unchecked, he says. Basic public justice systems in the developing world have in many instances descended into a state of utter chaos. Corruption is rampant. Cronyism and economic tyranny by an elite upper class is pervasive. Impunity encourages criminals and power seekers to prey on the population. The result? Ruined lives. No road out of poverty. And note, lawlessness severely undermines well-intentioned development efforts. I would just point out, by the way, that developed countries are not immune to the debilitating effects of violence. It's a problem for us, too. A new Justice Canada report documents the costs of 5 types of violent crimes that occurred in Canada in 2009. The economic impact came in at a whopping $13 billion. By far the single largest cost, $5 billion in total, was attributed to sexual assault and other sexual offenses. More than 90% of these victims were women. Such staggering totals from our own first world country with its strong justice system should help us to understand the enormous toll violence and impunity takes from the developing world. After taking a hard look at all such factors, Canada chose 20 countries for 80% of our development dollars. The criteria were 1, the partner country's ability to benefit from this support, and 2, the degree of need. We also began to target our development activities on 3 areas: food security, so better farming practices, research for better crops, opening up markets. 2, secure futures for children and youth, meaning help to develop intellectual potential, teacher training, supplying textbooks and infrastructure. And 3, secure economic development, advice on legislative and regulatory frameworks and a professional civil service. Canada's efforts are also guided by 3 cross-cutting themes: increasing environmental sustainability, promoting equality between women and men, and helping to strengthen governance and institutions. Many partner countries have a wealth of natural resources, but they are not being developed for the benefit of the population. I vividly recall a poignant comment by a roundtable participant in Guyana. He said, "This country is too rich to be so poor." So Canada supports entities like the African Minerals Development Centre, which works to grow supply and value-added chains. Countries are beginning to catch the vision for moving past simple resource export to value-added activities. For example, all diamond cutting and polishing used to be done in Antwerp. Botswana now has built the capacity to do that right in their own country. And this has provided a great boost to their economy. One of our retired ambassadors recently told me about some volunteer work he's doing. He's helping develop a certified conflict-free supply chain for gold. The aim is to marginalize illegal actors and allow for legitimate gold to be distinguished from gold ripped off by criminal elements. And by the way, our former ambassador to Peru told me that billions of dollars of silver and gold go out of that country every year from illegal mining activities, mostly by the mafia. You can imagine what that money would do for the people of Peru. This is only one example of public-private collaboration in support of greater economic justice. Here's something else. Canada ended government-to-government aid. Experience showed that government-to-government aid is the least effective. It's largely dissipated due to waste and corruption. We also believe that private investment in development programs provides an important reality check. So we work instead through trusted partners like World Vision and Care Canada. Another such partner is Grand Challenges Canada, under the leadership of Peter Singer. This organization places its emphasis on early childhood development. It targets 3 areas: 1, saving lives at birth; 2, saving brains, especially through ensuring good nutrition; and 3, mental health issues. GCC operates on the principle of innovation and entrepreneurship rather than wealth redistribution. It takes equity positions with bold innovators in developing countries. Peter Singer believes that social mobility provides opportunities to get ahead with one's own ideas, hard work, and merit-based supports. The role of government, he says, is to enforce a fair set of rules and insist that everyone plays by those rules. Canada also untied our aid. This allows partners to purchase on the world market for the best value in order to help the maximum number of people, and more to be accomplished with fewer dollars. If there's any allegation that money is going missing, we immediately call a halt to the project and do a thorough assessment. In fact, accountability is a key feature of Canadian development efforts. Formerly, our country's aid dollars had created an entire additional industry. New administrations and infrastructure and another set of civil servants were funded solely from the public purse. Although they were well-meaning, it became painfully clear that these development workers had what might be described as a paternalistic mentality, one of needing to be needed, with no incentive to create independence. Rather, they acted as enablers to foster disability. Their jobs and feelings of self-worth depended on that paradigm. We stopped funding this. We believe that developing the private sector economies of partner countries is critical. It creates jobs and self-reliance, rather than what have been described as beggar economies that rob people of self-worth and self-esteem. Our goal is to move partners from dependence to self-reliance. These are people who God deems worthy, and our help is designed to walk hand with them as people of worth. We place value on their ability. Here's something very few people know, because Canada never blows its own horn. Other countries regularly promise and even announce assistance, then don't deliver. Our government always pays what it pledges. Partners can count on it, and they know it. We have never defaulted on our commitments. This is far more significant than just being reliable. It goes all the way down to establish a bedrock of trust. It's one of the many reasons why the Canada brand is gold throughout the world. I note that one of the aims of your Honduras water project is to develop trust and respect. And that is so important. We heard about it this morning in the Aboriginal seminar. One of our retired ambassadors emphasized this, quote, "When there are asymmetric power relationships, trust among the players is an essential underpinning of lasting collaboration." Those who are active with the Micah Center will also know that 2 of the 8 Millennium Development Goals were not being touched by the international community. These 2 were to improve maternal health and to reduce child mortality. Frankly, these goals languished because no one wanted to touch the tangential and politically sensitive issue of abortion. Into this inexcusable void, Canada stepped up and took leadership. When it hosted the G8 meeting in 2010, our country launched the Initiative on Maternal, Newborn and Child Health, or MINCH. We backed an action plan with $2.85 billion. We also leveraged that commitment to draw support from other G8 partners and private sector actors such as the Gates Foundation. MINCH recognizes the need for healthier families, the need for women to play a greater role, the value of women in society as fundamental to economic justice. The result has really been nothing short of incredible. In just 4 years, we can see a hugely significant reduction in child mortality across the globe. We believe that MINCH will save the lives of well over 1 million children and newborns, as well as 60,000 young mothers. Globally, over 700,000 more children lived to their 5th birthday in 2011 than in 2010. In over 125 countries, maternal death rates have declined sharply in the past 5 years. Between 2010 and 2013, an estimated 2 million deaths from disease have been prevented. On May 28 to 30 in Toronto, we will host an international summit on women's health. There will be a compelling story to tell there on the results of efforts so far. But more importantly, the summit will be a real opportunity to plan for even greater progress in the immediate future. In 2012, the World Bank updated its estimates of global poverty rates with some encouraging findings. The percentage of people living below the poverty line declined for all 6 regions studied. It was the first decline over a 3-year period since 1981. I'm barely that old. In 1981, fully 52% of the population of the developing world was living below the $1.25 a day poverty line. In 2008, that was down to 22%. So although we certainly are not there yet, progress has been made. Our approach now respecting international development is to help partner countries find and build on their competitive advantages. This is one reason we're working on many new trade and foreign investment protection agreements. Capital flows are key. Developing countries have to develop the right climate to attract investment. Canada is very successful at these things, so our partnership is making a real difference. This new Government of Canada approach has sometimes been painted as an abandonment of humanitarianism. as just giving money to corporations. But this is far from being the truth. Canada certainly is encouraging the private sector to help increase the productivity and well-being of those living in poverty around the world. We're also working with countries to grow their economies. This makes them more self-sufficient and better able to provide opportunities for their citizens. I want to just give one example of that. Canada has a long history and global expertise in the extraction of natural resources. We have the best mining sector in the world. We are experts. The National Energy Board is among the best energy regulators in the world. Our corporate social responsibility code is the gold standard. These are assets to share. It's a natural fit for other countries to want to benefit from Canadian expertise. This is why we set up the Canadian International Institute for Extractive Industries and Development at the University of British Columbia in coalition with Simon Fraser University and École Polytechnique in Montreal. The Institute brings together the best of private sector, government, research, and civil society expertise to help developing countries secure the greatest possible benefit from their natural resources, including economic growth and poverty reduction. Their work includes creating space for consultation with Indigenous peoples to ensure their inclusion as partners in this progress. We know that if groups are systematically disenfranchised, that adds a significant challenge to any effort to deliver economic justice. So in the extractive sectors of partner countries, our focus is on developing regulatory regimes, on benefit sharing, on inclusion of Indigenous communities, and sharing best practices. Our representatives abroad have quickly seen real positive results from these changes. And of course, we're not putting all our eggs in just that one basket. We're balancing these initiatives with other forms of development. For example, 10 to 15% of our aid goes to provide acute humanitarian assistance in times of disaster, earthquakes, floods, and the like. We also provide high levels of support to multilateral bodies that work for progress in areas like human rights, strengthening democracy, and dispute resolution. And we devote significant efforts to enhance the rule of law. The world wants to replicate the Canadian value system. We share benefits well. We act with compassion. All citizens, whether rich or poor, have equal access to education and health care. Our high levels of accountability and transparency diminishes legitimate concerns about people being left behind. And of course, we're not perfect in any of these areas. This is not a blanket statement, but if you travel around the world, you just see how far ahead of the game we are, even though we still have things to work on. Our development partnerships help deliver greater economic justice with willing partners. Economic justice is not something we can take for granted in any part of the world. Both the underlying factors and the means to deliver this are complex and multifaceted. But although we are not there yet, either in Canada or anywhere else in the globe, important lessons and effective collaboration have driven real encouraging results. And I want to just say a little bit about the fact that economic justice is honoring God. In his excellent book, Rich Christians in a World of Hunger, Ronald J. Sider makes a compelling case for Christians to respond to these issues by placing the needs of the poor above our own needs. Above our own needs. As God declared through the prophet Micah, all of us are called to uphold fairness, whatever our political leanings. Both conservative-minded people and liberal-minded people alike must come to grips with issues of world poverty and the need to live justly in a world of continuing injustice. Michael Gillen, another acclaimed author, reminds us that our belief in God should make us go to bat for people who are being wronged. Commitment to honoring the greatest commandment played a leading role in abolishing slavery, championing women's rights, and most recently through the historic efforts of religious leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., gaining civil liberties for racial minorities. Gillen also points out that the origins of every one of the 7 largest public philanthropies in the U.S. can be traced back to women and men of great faith. God points to the pattern he ordained for our lives in 1 John 3, verses 16 to 18. I read it to you from a new translation, The Voice. We know what true love looks like because of Jesus. He gave his life for us, and he calls us to give our lives for our brothers and sisters. If a person owns the kinds of things we need to make it in the world, but refuses to share with those in need, is it even possible that God's love lives in him? My little children, don't just talk about love as an idea or a theory. Make it your true way of life and live in the pattern of gracious love. In closing, I quote Dr. Charles Malik, President of the 13th UN General Assembly. The needs of the world are much deeper than political freedom and security, much deeper than social justice and economic development, much deeper than democracy and progress. The deeper needs of the world belong to the sphere of the mind, the heart, and the spirit, a sphere to be penetrated with the light and grace of Jesus Christ. Our vision for economic justice should result from and in love for others, love poured out from our lives by the power of the indwelling Spirit of God. The motto of King's University College is teach each other in all wisdom. In our determination to be agents for economic justice, let's be guided once again by wisdom given in Micah. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Thank you very much.